everybody. I am going to get started. We have a nice group with us today. I'm super excited to see all of you. My name is Heather King. I'm the Managing Director for Shared Services and Outsourcing Network and IA for the Americas. And welcome to our first workshop of the day, implementing a best-in-class center of excellence from our good friends at Chazey Partners. We are super excited to have this workshop for you. I just wanted to make a few announcements, and then I'm going to throw it to our wonderful workshop leaders for the next hour. So, what? I'm sorry? All right, so the first thing that I'm going to ask is that everybody mutes themselves unless they have a question when we open it for a Q&A. So that's kind of the first point. We are in a Zoom webinar right now, so for that, there is no chat box on the side. But we do want this to be interactive where you can ask your questions at certain points during the workshop. So our workshop moderators are going to, every couple of minutes, going to say, does anyone have a question? And at that point, you should unmute yourselves and ask whatever question that you might have. It is up to you to ask your questions and to be interactive because, again, we don't have that chat box. We are going to be recording this session. As soon as I stop talking, I'm going to start recording, and the workshop will be available at Chazey's booth in our expo hall. So if you're interested in looking at it, it will be on demand as well. You'll be able to see it again and get anything that you might have missed watching it live. Another exciting thing to note is that we are doing something called a pictograph, a sketch artist. We have a lovely gentleman named John who is actually going to be sketching a pictograph of the notes from this meeting. And it's going to be a really cool graphic that you will be able to have at Chazey's booth as well. And every 20 minutes, we're going to check in with him so you can see what the heck I'm talking about. But I promise you, it's going to be really exciting. So we, as this is going to be interactive, I see a lot of people don't have their cameras on, but we do still want to be able to see you. So if you don't mind, we would love it if you can keep your cameras on, especially when you're going to ask your questions. And also you can see in the participants list, if you open that up, that we can't really see names or anything. So if you are able to kind of toggle over your name in the participants list and type in your company with your name, so we know who is speaking when you might ask a question, that would be super helpful. And I think that that's it for me. If anyone has any questions, I will pop in at the end to make some announcements. Just some other, one last thing, gamification. Make sure you're participating today, you get points, so you're on our board. We have a ton of prizes. I'll go over that a little bit at the end. CPE credits, you have to participate in this entire session. We are tracking it, but this will count for CPE credits. All right, so I am going to hand it over to Chewy and Phil from Chazey Partners. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. We're really excited for this workshop today, and I will be recording. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm based on the West Coast here in California. I'm sure you guys are all over the Americas and maybe globally, so welcome, everybody. My name's Phil Searle. I'll introduce myself in a second along with Chewy, but just to confirm, this workshop today, workshop A, first session of the day, is regarding implementing a best-in-class center of excellence CoE to drive your enterprise's intelligent automation journey. So that's the main topic for today. As there's a growing appetite for RPA and IA in general, there's a lot of questions around how to set that up, the challenges, governance, drive, scaling, etc. We're going to be talking a lot about that today in terms of focusing specifically on a CoE and how it can help you drive that digital transformation, how it can help you scale. So some of the topics we're going to cover today is exactly what is RPA, Intelligent Automation CoE, in fact, what is RPA, IA in general. We'll take a look at the marketplace, we'll do some definitions, and then we're going to focus in on how to actually set up, establish, and run a best-in-class CoE. And Chewy, who'll be joining me on that session, will do a deep dive into that area. And then we'll close with the time we have left on what we call the 4 core pillars of any RPA journey, covering process suitability, automation, strategy, and business case. That's the first pillar. Proof of concept, CoE implementation, and bot development. Those are the 4 pillars. So that's the topic for today, focused around CoE. So briefly, my name's Phil Searle. I'm the founder and CEO of Chazey Partners. Founded Chazey in just nearly 15 years ago. I've been kicking around the transformation, finance, technology, outsourcing, shared services space for a long time, both with Chazey and prior to that. Prior to that, I was the global controller at 3Com. For those of you who remember 3Com Corporation, I've also been a CFO of business units and companies around the world prior to setting up Chazey. Chewy, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yes, Phil, thank you. I am Chewy Michel. I'm the head of RPA at Chazey Partners. I have been around IT and process transformation for over 20 years. And roughly in the last 6-7 years, very close to RPA and intelligent automation. I'm happy to be here with you. I look forward to the session, hoping these less than 60 minutes are going to be meaningful to you and to your automation program. Back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Chewy. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, so this is the agenda for today. We will stop on occasions to take questions, but if we don't get too many questions as we go, we will try and have some time at the end for general questions. But if you have a question, as Heather mentioned, please just let us know, ask the question. We'll take it as we go, as if it were a normal workshop, a standard workshop. So that's the plan. So we're going to be talking about a brief introduction to Chazey, which I'll do in a couple of slides. Then I'll be talking about RPA and hyperautomation in general, and Chewy will take us through a definition and research on CoE and how to best implement a CoE, and then we'll talk about those 4 core pillars I mentioned earlier on. And a couple of times during the session, we'll check in with John, the sketch artist that Heather mentioned, just to see how he's getting on too. Okay, Chewy. Thank you. So I mentioned founded Chazey 15 years ago. We have 3 core offerings, what I call the more traditional back office shared services transformation, which is end-to-end design, build, deploy. On our right-hand side, we have a broader business transformation, which include technology enablement, mergers and acquisitions, business continuity planning, operating model in more broad terms. And then the middle pillar is where we're focusing on RPA and intelligent automation. As I mentioned, I'm based in California. We're headquartered in California, but we have offices throughout the world, throughout Latin America, the US, and in Europe, and also in Asia Pac too. So we're based all over the place, mainly focused on what we call back office, but broader in general, finance, HR, IT, procurement, customer operations, member services, etc. Okay, chat. Thanks, Chewy. This is just one slide on our client portfolio. Left-hand side is mainly our higher education and public sector, University of California, University of Iowa system, US government, some Canadian provincial government. In the middle is our multinational client base. You can see some big names there. On the right is mainly our Latin American client base, which is pretty significant. And as I mentioned, we have a significant presence in Latin America. Thanks. All right, so let's get into the presentation for today. So what exactly is RPA, Robotic Process Automation? Basically, there's a couple of definitions here and a bit of a drill down. So RPA is the application, this is more technical, application of technology that enables computer software to partially or fully automate human activities that are otherwise manual, repetitive, and rules-based. So I talk a lot about this. It's all about manual processes that sit alongside and outside your other technologies, be it your ERP systems, your workflow systems, your document management systems, etc. These are often the many other processes that have not been automated by any other means that remain very manual and human-based. RPA is a solution that's been around for a number of years. I personally came across it about 5 years ago and initially thought it was just another one of those technology fads and trends, but really it's much more than that. And this whole hyper-automation in general, the 4th industrial revolution is fundamentally changing the way things get done. In fact, we really don't do any shared services or transformation project where we at least don't discuss RPA and IA in general as part of your solution mix. So we do, some of our engagements are broader, including some element of RPA, and others are RPA specific. Hyperautomation, on the other hand, is a little bit broad, it's a lot broader. It includes not only RPA, but business analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. And we'll come back to that. And that's part of the new sort of trend, if you want to call it that, around hyperautomation. Chewy, thank you. So what about RPA specifically? Well, it's about bots, but it's not about shiny robots wandering around the warehouse. This is about RPA automation software. The software itself can mimic or fully automate routine rules-based tasks, which are normally performed by humans. And we sometimes call it swivel chair type of work or click work or step work, which can be routinely copied and converted to software. The bots that you actually develop interpret, trigger responses, and communicate with systems and between systems in order to perform a variety of repetitive tasks. And they transact in an application or website in exactly the same way as a person would, which is why you hear terms like hybrid workforce, where you get humans and bots working alongside, either on a desktop or through a server-based solution, depending on whether you're really talking about robotic desktop automation or robotic process automation. There's a little bit of a difference between those two, which we're not going to get into today. Okay. So what is this opportunity? So some of the latest this is a Blue Prism 2020 global survey. Blue Prism are one of the main vendors in this space. But I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but what you can see, there's some very high percentages here, 92%, 81%, 80%. Well, really, it's about asking decision makers what they believe RPA specifically and IA in general is going to do, and how it's going to work, and how important it is. Well, the very top left, you see 92% of decision makers believe that RPA itself is important for driving digital transformation. If you look down the bottom right, 78% of workers believe that using tech to automate tasks would improve their work life. And in between, you've got a lot of these metrics, and I'll leave you guys, you'll obviously get a copy of these slides through SSON, or you can get them from us directly at Chazey Partners. You can look at these, but the main thing is this is changing the way work gets done, and it's also changing the mindset of the workforce, who are starting, especially more recently, buying into the concept of RPA and IA in general. The CoE, as part of this, which we're going to come on to in a second, is a critical enabler for RPA scaling across the enterprise. And as Chewy will mention later, you do find organizations will move forward with RPA pilots in divisions or in a country or in a business unit or in a location. You don't need a CoE to necessarily get going. But as you decide to scale and transform across the enterprise, CoEs in the forms that Chewy is going to be talking about can be a big part of that scaling and opportunity. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, Chewy, thank you. So specifically focusing on RPA as opposed to AI or any of these other broader technologies, where does RPA best fit? Well, this is just on one chart. Highly manual, repetitive processes, generally rules-based, generally low exceptions, machine readable, electric type input, generally high volumes. You notice I keep saying generally because that's not always the case, and RPA can be applied to a scale, but it's mainly a scale of fit. So the more stable the process, the more consistent the need, the more consistent the application, the better RPA fits. But as you bring in other automation technologies, that can start to change. And I mentioned on the bottom right here, sometimes what we call swivel chair processes, where you sat at your laptop or your computer, and you may be swiveling between tools and applications. RPA can be a great enabler. And again, just to get back onto here, as you start to scale, that CoE can help with that. And you really need to understand your discovery processes and tools. And again, Chewy will touch on that a little bit later. Thank you, Chewy. All right, I mentioned hyperautomation earlier. What's all that about? Well, this is one of the #1 Gartner top 10 strategic technology trends for 2020, hyperautomation. It's not just RPA, it's beyond RPA. It includes cognitive solutions, machine learning, adaptation, unstructured data as opposed to specifically structured data, more complex processes. And that marriage of different technologies is really what hyperautomation is all about. If you go to the next slide, Chewy. And this is a little bit more how that fits. So you have RPA as one big block in the hyperautomation toolkit, but then you have natural language processing, AI, computer vision, intelligent optical character recognition. I'm sure you've seen a lot of those solutions out there. Machine learning, native integration tools, business process management, advanced analytics, and process mining. All of these tools are part of the hyperautomation trend. And as it says here on the right, and I mentioned, it's a mix of technologies and analytical tools, which can be used to process in a hyper-automated, semi-automated, or even an autonomous way. And again, the CoE is pivotal to evolving your RPA towards hyper-automation. Okay, Chewy? Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second here, but to unleash the full power of RPA-IA, implementing a well-planned RPA Center of Excellence is essential, and that's where Chewy is going to come in. But before we move on, just going to check in with John, ask how he's doing with the sketch artist. John, how are you getting on?
I'm doing good. I'm learning a lot of cool stuff as I go too. So,
Okay.
Don, can you share your screen for a second?
yeah, give me just a second here. All right.
Let's see what you're doing.
I could probably use some automated program to share my screen. It'd be a little faster.
Ah,
There we go.
awesome. So everybody
There you
knows what
go.
John's working on. You're going to get, it will be at Chazey's booth at the end of the event, or at the end of the day.
That's cool. Just one small thing, John. My name has an L in it, so SEARLE. Just can you? They can correct that later on.
I'm glad you caught that there. I'll fix that here.
No worries. All right, Chewy, I'm going to hand over to you unless there's any questions before we move on. There is a fair amount of content, so we will take questions at the end if we don't get any.
John, you can stop sharing your screen. Thank you.
Any questions before we hand back to Chewy? John, thank you. All right, Chewy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Phil. So as Phil mentioned, in the next 20 to 30 minutes, I plan to cover the definition of Center of Excellence, some relevant research that we think will be meaningful to you, share with you best practices and how to go about implementing a Center of Excellence, and then how we at Chazey see the core 4 pillars for hyperautomation and RPA. So let me look here. First, the definition, right? So when I think about what a Center of Excellence is, I always try to remind myself what a Center of Excellence is not. So first of all, a Center of Excellence is not a large bureaucratic office, but rather an agile, central, governed body that provides automation services in the form of support, advice, standards, all across the life cycle of an automation program. Second, a CoE, it's not a group of people just developing RPA. It is a combination of people, process, technology, helping and empowering organizations to accelerate time to value with RPA and other emerging technologies like machine learning. Finally, CoE, it's not an isolated group of individuals with technical skills. Instead, CoEs must have process and business skills to then become core components of the digital transformation of any enterprise. The RPA CoE must be the evangelist and catalyst of automation in the organization. So a little bit of industry trends and statistics. Keep in mind that the CoE, as Phil mentioned, CoE is not a prerequisite to launch any RPA automation program. More than 70% of the organizations start RPA with a proof of concept and a handful of automations just so they can start learning about RPA and they can start understanding further what is the value of automation for an organization. Typically, to run a PLC, a third party is used, and that's kind of the preferred choice in the industry. But as RPA programs mature, we're seeing a trend for companies to develop internal capabilities as well, and only outsource portions of the process of the life cycle, such as development, maintenance, and support. So how others in the industry are running their automation programs? There is still a lot of debate about what is the right operating model for RPA or RPA CoE. And there is a very simple reason for that, right? Very simple reason why there's a lot of talk about it, there's a lot of discussion about it, is the fact that the use of RPA technology does not require deep IT technical skills. Actually, many RPA developers in our team, many RPA developers in other teams have no IT background. Therefore, the question about where the CoE should report to, whether it should report within IT, outside IT, that's a question that is often answered differently organization by organization. There is no right answer. So both have pros and cons. What is clear is that more and more companies are coming forward, are bringing forward hybrid models to run CoE, where they build some capabilities internally and they outsource portions of that capabilities to a third party. So let's talk about operating models. Let's talk about how to implement a CoE. With the arrival of hyperautomation, which Phil mentioned, which is kind of the evolution of RPA, a CoE needs to evolve too. There's no doubt about that. As a central government body, which we defined before, that runs automation programs across the organization, a CoE needs to be built as a lean, almost flat organization, very close to the business, that not only understands the technicalities of RPA as a software, but also with deep process expertise, with great focus on asset utilization. So new and future automations don't need to start from scratch, but rather you leverage past existing RPA assets to accelerate the cycle time of new automation projects. Let's move to learning more about operating models. So typically there are many documents out there about what is the right operating model. And again, I'm gonna mention here, there's an interesting debate taking place because more than 1/3 of the companies have built CoEs in their business unit, but also with a central IT team with the CIO office. There are at least 3 different operating models that are listed here: centralized, federated, hybrid. There are process frameworks today, right? So picking one, what is the right answer? There's no perfect answer. But the good news is that out there are process frameworks and new tools to evaluate the maturity state of an organization and what operating model better fits the needs of each company. Let's keep in mind, and I like to remind myself that all the time, let's keep in mind that RPA and hyperautomation, it is not a destination, it is a journey. Therefore, selecting one CoE model in the first place and then shifting to a new CoE model, it's definitely an option for all of us. Let's start with, sorry, I missed one chart. Let's start with the centralized model, right? This is by far the most traditional CoE model out there and very popular in the IT world, because we're keeping a tight control end-to-end to ensure that you have the right standards and that the standards are followed at all times. This model is used roughly by 20% of the companies out there. Therefore, 1 out of 5 companies have selected the centralized setup, but what we are seeing is a decreasing trend for this model. The level of technical expertise, though, in this model is quite high. On the other hand, as a disadvantage, the general perception of the users of the automation is that the CoE is not very close to the needs and pain points of the operational teams out there. Let's move to, give me 1 sec. I guess I missed that. Okay, I'm going too fast here. Sorry about that. Control, federated. This is what I was looking for, the federated model. This is not the preferred model in IT, but on the other hand, is the preferred model in the business units. Since these business units, they don't need to compete with each other to get the right priorities out there, and they just compete for priorities within the function. Furthermore, this is a model that has enabled large organizations to accelerate the process of discovery automation. And there's a key reason for that. They know their processes, they are close to their processes, they are close to the pain points, so they have a greater ability to clearly identify the opportunities for automation. However, there are disadvantages to this, right? So if we have a totally decentralized model, each organization could go out and select a different RPA vendor, right? So each one using different technologies in the company. Also, different development frameworks, which become very inconsistent and very hard to support and maintain. Also, there's limited best practice sharing in this CoE model. This model, just as in the case of the Central, has been adopted by nearly 20% of the organizations, and what we're seeing out there as a trend, it's a steady state. So let's go to hybrid now, right? So this hybrid model, as I mentioned before, seems to be positioning as the most popular. More than 40% of the organizations have adopted this model, and other companies may refer this model as co-federated too, so just so you know. And according to our research and conversation with clients and understanding RPA programs, this model seems to have a strong correlation with the adoption of RPA across the enterprise. And also, interestingly enough, this model has triggered pilots for what is called now citizen development, which means assigning appended bot licenses to certain users outside the RPA center so they can create their own automations, of course, following guidelines, following policies from the CoE. Also, what we're seeing across this hybrid model is that there are a number of possible variants. For example, many enterprises that use this hybrid model enable the organization to run low and medium complexity automations outside the core CoE in this satellite CoE. But software selection, for example, complex automations, as well as emerging technologies that we just mentioned, like machine learning and process mining, this type of technology, they keep under the control of the Center of Excellence government body, the main Center of Excellence. Now, people, process, and technology. I always like to talk about people, process, and technologies. And regardless of the operating model selected for you to run your RPA program or the software that you selected, there is a clear path to take existing CoEs to the next level. As I mentioned before, and I keep saying that all the time, RPA, it's not a destination, but rather it's a journey. With CoEs, it's the same story. In order to scale your RPA program, your CoE needs to change too. There's no doubt about it. So change requires a holistic view across people, process, and technology as core pillars for evolution. The CoE, as a central government body, needs to provide new frameworks, needs to provide new tools to manage automations end-to-end, from discovery to process documentation, development, as well, very important, as well as engaging and empowering employees to submit more and better ideas for automation via crowdsourcing. Last but not least is the use of business intelligence. So you can capture, track, and demonstrate value to the company, both from a qualitative and quantitative perspective. So I'm gonna move to the next section, but before I do that, I'd like to just pause for a second and see if there's any questions from the audience so far.
Shui, I have a question that was sent beforehand, but remember everybody, this is your time. If you have questions, don't be shy. You just have to, throw it out there. They're happy to answer it. But anyway, so a question that was written to us beforehand was, what are some of the most common reasons an RPA CoE fails?
One of the most common reasons why RPA, so there are a few, right? But and we have a chart later on, but change management. Definitely change management, it's many times overlooked. So what is the impact to humans? How humans want to be communicated, want to be engaged by the RPA program. And there's a clear failure in many of the RPA programs as it relates to implementing solid communication plans, solid engagement plans, and at the end of the day, also getting the right stakeholder support. To change management as an umbrella, it's to me the key factor for failure.
Yeah,
I don't know, Phil, you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, Chewy, I'm just going to take the opportunity, thanks, Chewy, to add something in. I mean, this is a sort of different. You mentioned, Chewy, the citizen developer model. And I mentioned right at the start, it's about, leveraging all those, automating those processes sitting outside the main technology. So this is a new way of automating. And therefore, there needs to be a new partnership between the IT organization and what's called the business. And this is where the CoE performs a really critical role, because it's managing a different way of automating. And in doing that, you can't operate in a traditional old school way of being an IT organization that holds everything centrally and doesn't necessarily release the configuration potential of the technology to the business. But on the flip side, the CoE also needs to have some infrastructure and governance. Otherwise, it becomes a free-for-all. It's what I call firing bots all over the place. So this is why, if you don't have that balance correct in a CoE, and to Chewy's point, don't evolve and adapt the CoE depending on where you are on your own journey, then the COE can start to become irrelevant and fail, and the business can become frustrated, or the COE or the actual program can lose control. So the COE needs to constantly think about the balance between IT and the business, and constantly needs to think about the journey and where the business and technology is going. It's not a one-time gig. It's not a traditional COE in that sense. So that's a great question.
Thanks for the question. Any other question before I keep moving here? Thank you.
Okay.
So let's talk about a little bit about people, right? And as we said, this is all about taking your COE to the next level. And this is all about evolving your COE across people, process, and technology. So from a people standpoint, COE roles are clearly changing. As I shared before, RPA is not about just IT professionals. The trend we're seeing is that traditional business analysts, process subject matter experts, continuous improvement leaders, among other roles in the enterprise, have now the ability to evolve their roles towards RPA. Also, let's keep in mind, as I said before, that many non-IT professionals, they have recently shifted careers to learn, get certifications, and even become RPA developers. Continuing with the people side of it, right? There are specific roles within RPA, with an RPA COE. Some are very technical. As you can see, your infrastructure engineers, your developers. Others are more process-oriented, as RPA analysts. But don't forget the business side of it. Business side of it, right? It's not only the technical, it's not only the process, it's the business side of it. So clearly, as I mentioned before, key reason for failure is your change management. So either as a dedicated role or a partial role, RPA change managers are becoming increasingly important for centers of excellence. Another trend we're seeing, and this is critical for success, is the integration of process excellence or continuous improvement teams with the RPA COEs. They become a single operating unit that looks at process evolution and looks at process transformation end to end. So now we talked about people, we want to talk about process. Process is important, right? I always say that if you don't do a proper and a correct process documentation, your bot is gonna fail. I should have said that when I got the question, right? But a clear reason for a bot to fail is the lack of a proper process documentation and process understanding. When you create your workflows, proper workflows, the right level 4, level 5 documentation, making sure that when you go about evaluating processes, you're able to understand upfront what is the expected return on investment. And you only get that if you do if you only do a process assessment that is proper, right? When you look at the viability of the automation, the complexity associated with the automation, Phil mentioned some of the key criteria to run an RPA program. Your data structure needs to be consistent, mostly electronic, very repetitive process, systems and processes that are stable as well. And again, when you go about implementing a COE, you want to make sure that you have the right policies, the right guidelines, the right job roles, the right training for your team. And again, communicate as part of your change management process. Technology, we talked about technology.
The only thing I would add, can you just go back a slide for a second?
I'm gonna try.
There we go. So on the right-hand side, the whole point about RPA, and we've been involved with a lot of RPA development projects, is you really need to get every single step right. So when you get to level 5, these desktop procedures or sales and operating procedures have to be very, very specific and detailed. This isn't a process, your process mapping is part of it, but when you actually get to the documentation, you need really specialized, detailed process documentation. And again, the CoE as part of the whole model can make sure that the standards around that documentation, the training around that documentation, the certification around the analysts and the developers, whether that be external certification or internal certification as the CoEs develop, is really, really important. So this is a big role of the COE as you scale. Again, as you start up, you don't need all of these things in place while you're piloting and testing the waters, etc. But as you scale, you need to have a really consistent approach. Otherwise, this can get quite messy. So I just wanted to, and that links to process, and this is where COE can set standards. They don't necessarily have to be the same as another company's standards, but it can set standards for your organization.
Thank you, Phil. Good point. Now moving to technology. We talked about people, we talked about process, now moving to technology. There are new tools out there, right? So Phil mentioned. There's a question out there, I think. Is there a question?
Hi, sorry, I've got one more. How you doing? So somebody had asked, how big should a COE be to start?
That is the $1 million question, right? So no, great question, right? It depends on your demand, right? And this is why strategic planning becomes very important. So it is all about understanding the strategic automation roadmap. So you can look at the 12-month horizon and see in the following 12 months, these are roughly the automations that we plan to make. That gives you a demand statement, and then you can figure out if you need 1 developer or you need 10 developers, if you need 2 business analysts or you need 10 business analysts. And of course, the larger your COE becomes, the more dedicated the roles are. So I mentioned before change management, right? Change management in many COEs, it's now a part-time role. Whereas for COEs that are growing, it is increasingly becoming a full-time role, and even change managers for different business units. So yeah, it depends. There are certain guidelines out there as we go about, at Chazey, when we go about setting up a COE, we do an overview of the strategic roadmap. We understand the demand, and then we help organizations to understand the right sizing for the COE.
I would just quickly add, thanks, Stu. I would just quickly add that it partly depends on where the initial driver for the RPA hyper-automation initiative is coming from. So, for example, if you get a senior exec, a CIO or a COO or CEO wants to hears about digital office and digital transformation and wants to move forward, you tend to have those organizations will set up that COE fairly large and fairly structured earlier on. Whereas if it's been driven out in the field, in the business, and there are pilots going on, those COEs either won't exist initially or they'll be relatively small. So it depends in one way who's driving the initiative and to what degree it's perceived as strategic at the top level. Either way, over time, everything we've talked about has to happen. You have to evolve the COE. If it's too centralized, it needs to decentralize a little bit hybrid. If it's too distributed, it needs to centralize a bit, and it will grow, to Chewy's point, based on demand. And if it's successful, it will grow very quickly. What you mustn't do is have it grow too ad hoc, and there, because that will maybe cause problems that will actually delay the whole initiative, because maybe you've got different software vendors, you've got different integration interface issues, you've got different pricing, you've got maybe some mutual challenges between IT and business units. So that's what happens. So the size depends on where you are on your journey, who's driving it, and how quickly you're moving to some degree. So before I just hand back to you, Chewy, can we maybe just take the opportunity to just check in with John again one more time, see how he's getting on, see if he can share something with us for the screen just before I hand back to you again, Chewy. John, can you share your screen again?
I think Chewy has to unshare his screen for John to share his screen.
Okay, now I stopped.
There we go.
Thanks for the reminder, Heather.
No problem. That's what I'm here for. John, can you share your screen? Oh, great. Oh, wow. Look at that. Super cool. So just a reminder to everybody, I mean, John's doing a great job and this looks super cool. This will be available as a PDF download at the Chazey booth in our expo hall. So you're going to have to go there when we open to get that. Thanks so much, John. All right, please unshare your screen so we can get back to Chewy.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, John. So now let's jump into technology. As I mentioned, right, we talked about people, we talked about process, now technology. And Phil mentioned it before, right? With the arrival of Hyperautomation, there are new emerging technologies that become part of your automation toolkit, right? So, for example, from a process discovery standpoint, there are new tools such as process mining and task mining. If you want to drive more complex and more advanced automations, there's advanced OCR out there, there's machine learning, there's natural language processing. If you want to scale the level of engagement in an organization, crowdsourcing and your control towers are critical. So more and more employees provide and submit better and more ideas for automation, as well as the ability for the CoE to reach out to the organizations that were not interested in RPA before. There are other cool features in the new toolkits for hyperautomation and tools that a CoE must use, such as something called task capture, which accelerates the time. We said how important is to create process documentation. So now there are tools out there that are going to help business analysts to accelerate the time to create PDDs or process documentation for automation. I mentioned before, we have to increase, a CoE must increase the visibility over all aspects of the RPA program. Technical aspects such as license utilization and bot performance, volumes, quality, work done by the bot, financial aspects such as current cost savings, all through the adoption of automation across the organization by process or by department. A CoE must provide end-to-end visibility of the program to senior management, as well as to drive key insights on opportunities to improve. Let me move to the next chart here. Change management. I mentioned change management a couple of times before, and I guess I was right. Right? The top reason why RPA programs fail is poor change management. And guess who's the ultimate responsible for change management as it relates to RPA and automation? You're right. The ultimate responsible is your CoE. So key success factors for RPA change management. This is the way we see it from Chazey. First one, very important, is stakeholder support. So a CoE must have an official, almost C-level sponsor who's going to be responsible, as I said, right, for sponsoring, but also to remove roadblocks in the way. Communication, right? Communication is critical. The 3 C's for communication, consultation, and collaboration. A CoE needs to have a communication strategy, and this has to be tightly linked with HR and employee communication, just so it has the right impact at the corporate level. Also, employee engagement, very important, right? We talked about crowdsourcing. We talked about how do you empower organizations and employees to submit better and more ideas to the CoE, and you have to do it in forms of crowdsourcing, in some form of competitions, right? So there are competitions around innovation and automation. There are tools that actually provide certificates, not certificates for actually developing a bot, but certificates for being an ideator, which is sending a lot of good ideas to the CoE so that CoE can develop automation. So I'm going to move to the last section, which is the 4 core pillars. But before I do that, I wanted to then open up for any questions from the audience, any comments from the audience before we move to the last section.
I've got one more for you, Chewy. Surprise, surprise. Somebody wanted to know, it's a good thing people write in beforehand, right? So somebody wanted to know, when do we know that we are ready for an RPA CoE?
Well, I'm going to take it first, Phil, and then I'd like to hear from you as well. So when do you think you're ready? When do you know that, when do you understand what is the value that automation can provide to an organization? Meaning, you have gone through your initial proof of concept, you have a handful of automations running, and your strategic intent is to scale automation. Your strategic intent is to take it from 5 bots to 50 bots. So at that point in time, just so it doesn't become a mess, you need the right structure in place, you need the right policies, you need the right procedures in place, you need the governed body. So it's almost a maturity statement. If your strategic intent is to scale and your organization is in the early stages of maturity, then that might be a good point in time to think about and consider the creation, the design and implementation of a center of excellence for automation.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, Chu. I'm just making some notes because it's a really good question. We said earlier on that you don't actually need to have a COE to start the pilot, etc. You can. I mentioned that you could, if it's a top-down initiative, you can set up your COE first, and that's great. You don't have to, and you don't always see it a lot, actually. But so it's really about, to Chewy's point, it's about at what point are you starting to scale? At what point are you facing constraints? And that's when you need to bring in the COE. You don't want to grow too much in isolation of the rest of the organization, especially if you want to start sharing best practices. Some of the other things you need to think about, of course, are infrastructure requirements as you scale, technology, security requirements. We haven't even touched on that, but as you start, scaling, you must engage your security organization, data privacy. All of these things are important, and you should be doing those at enterprise level. And the other thing is when I mentioned constraints, that maybe you need more resources, maybe you need more budget. So as you start to scale is the key requirement. Whether you can do it too early or too late, yeah, of course you can. But as you start to build up, the one other thing I would say is the software side of things, software purchase side of things, because you might want to engage, at an enterprise-wide level to negotiate a significant number more of bot licenses. And then you should be looking at a COE to start leveraging your purchasing organization in your own scale to buy those, and consistency. So the answer is you don't need it up front. We've mentioned that already. You do need it as you start to scale, and especially as you start to face constraints or have some potential issues you knock up against. So fairly early on, you should be thinking about it. Otherwise, your scaling will fail, would be what I would say.
Thank you, Phil. And just one last comment on the right timing. We see a number of companies doing things in parallel. So for example, as you go about running your first proof of concept and your first automation, you start with your design phase, right? Not even implementing it, not even putting things out there, but the whole design phase where you start learning from the RPA roles that sit in a center of excellence, IPA roles that are critical within IT and outside IT. So it's almost like start shaping in parallel with the first set of automation. If you hold design phase, and once you're ready to scale, you have the design already in place, and it's all about implementing it.
Yeah, one other thing we've seen is actually where you initially were decentralized, you then go quite central, but then once you get the sort of maturity across the organization, you can decentralize definitely development. Back to your Chewy's citizen developer. So you can centralize maybe from an infrastructure, security, software, licensing perspective, but then you actually sort of run the program centrally, but then you actually start to decentralize actual development back to the business unit. So again, a cycle as you grow.
Yeah, great point, Phil. Thank you. Now, wisdom from the CIO. So the RPA journey needs to be seen as a strategic. And it can be used as a tool to fire all over the place in an uncontrolled way. Right? It requires a formal structure, strong governance, approved business cases, and supporting automation roadmap. Implementation should be part of a comprehensive strategy. Proper planning is key. We talked about change management engagement with key stakeholders, getting the right sponsors in place. A clear management of change, right? Change management, communication. And all supported by these new trends, right? New operating models, new frameworks, new technology, so they can work as an ecosystem in the new CoE, the CoE of the future. So do you need help with your journey in automation? This is our view, right, on what important, critical, key factors for success. As we said, right, CoEs are not the answer to everything. They are only a catalyst to grow and to accelerate automation. So we looked across end-to-end RPA program implementation from process suitability through proof of concept. We mentioned proof of concept a lot. We do design and implementation of CoEs, and we do what we call bot factory or on-demand bot development. Process suitability. We at Chazey developed a very powerful tool in which we have embedded a number of algorithms using key quantitative and qualitative data to provide a diagnosis on any given process to determine the viability of the automation, the complexity of the project, and upfront, very important, your expected return on investment. This is a key input. Your process suitability is a key input to develop a strategic automation roadmap. This tool, Chazey's tool, is used, we have used it assisting clients in the implementation of new CoE. So the tool that I just mentioned from process suitability, once we go about designing and implementing CoE, we give that tool to subject matter experts and business analysts so they can use it moving forward. Moving to the next one, it's PLCs, right? So PLCs we have talked about, and usually as we say, right, show me the money. And this is what a PLC actually is. It's a contained process suitability assessment, perhaps 3 to 5 processes looked at using the Chazey's RPA assessment tool to then recommend the most viable options with a better ROI, and then document the process, design the solution, develop the bot, going through UAT, and once the bot is ready, move it to production. So this is kind of proof of concept. It's a perfect solution for organizations trying to start an RPA program or trying to get the buy-in from new organizations that are not currently interested in RPA. Sounds like a lot, right? But we normally at Chazey, we take no more than 6 weeks to deliver a proof of concept and a pilot. We talked about CoEs. So we have talked about a lot about it. There's a lot of potential for CoEs. So they become a core component of the digital transformation of the enterprise. We at Chazey have more than 50 years worth of experience designing and implementing center of excellence across many business processes. And as we mentioned, over the last 5 to 7 years, assisting clients to set up RPA centers. Last but not least, Bot Factory. This is where we offer bot development linked to any of the previous 3 offerings, right? The previous 3 offerings that we talked about, your proof of concept, your center of excellence, your process suitability. It can come with it, or it can be on a standalone service using Chazey's 6-step approach to ensure the best quality of the automation and across multiple software platforms. So CoEs are not the answer to everything. Many RPA programs start without a CoE, but when it comes down to scaling RPA, accelerating time to value, and evolving towards hyperautomation, a proper CoE is a must. We have a white paper that we wanted to share with you. You can download the 7 steps to successfully deploying RPA in your enterprise, and we invite you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chewy. The guide we actually wrote in coordination with the SSON a year or so back, and as Chewy mentioned, you can either download it or contact us directly to get a copy of that. And as I've mentioned, so thanks, Chewy. Hopefully this has been a useful session for you guys. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I mentioned we've been doing this for 4 or 5 years on a really focused basis, and it's becoming part of everything we do. You know, whether we're setting up a shared service center or looking at a new SI integration or business continuity planning or whatever, RPA is part of everything, or intelligent automation is part of the solution mix now, because it should be, because as you saw that data we put up front with the Gartner data and the Blue Prism data, every organization is looking at this going forward. It's part of the product, you know, solution to productivity challenges that we're seeing in the workplace as well. So before we just I hand back to Heather, John, maybe we can take one more look at the sketch before we do that.
Let me stop sharing. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, the road trip, it's, as we said, right? It is all about the journey.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, John. We look forward to seeing the final version. Heather, we'll hand back to you if there's any one final question you have or any closing remarks. But before I do that, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the sessions here at the IA event. Thank you.
I don't have any questions left. I've read the ones that we were sent. Does anybody have any last question they want? We have time for one short question if anybody wants to brave the session and ask a question. I have a feeling they're not going to, but I'm giving you 20 seconds. You know, speak now or forever hold your peace. Everybody, if you do have any questions and you're just shy, because I understand how that goes, please just go to Chazey Partners booth in our expo hall. It's going to be open all week next week. And they will be more than happy to answer any of your questions. You can also send them a message within Pathable right now if you want. If you have a question that you want answered, but you don't want to wait until next week, you don't have to. Just go find Phil and go find Chewy in our speakers drop down, or the attendees. They'll be there, and you can just send them a private message, and I'm sure they will be able to set up a time to meet with you and be more than happy to do it. I know that we can't really hear a great round of applause, but thank you so much to Chewy and Phil for that workshop. It was such a fantastic way to have our workshop day. Yes, exactly. There we go. And so
the tiny robot.
The sketch that John was making that you saw, he's going to finish that up and he's going to send it across to Chazey, and they will have it available at their booth. So the only way you're going to get it is if you go to their booth to pick it up. So make sure you do that. Just a couple of last comments, couple of last things that I want to let everybody know. Our next workshop will start. We'll be opening that up in a couple of minutes, but you have to get out of this meeting, go back into your agenda in Pathable, and then click into your next workshop, just like you did for this one. And thank you all for doing that. We had, if anybody's watched, we had about 65 people in here, so it was fantastic. Also, I just want to make sure everybody knows that you know, CPE credits, again, for participating in this whole thing, you are eligible for about 1 CPE credit for this. Keep adding them up. You'll get them at the, we will be sending certificates at the end of the event. For attending this, you have earned points for attending a session. And if you go into Pathable and you look at the earn prizes link, there's a way that at the end of the event, you can win $1,000. We are raffling off $1,000, not raffling, whoever does the most sessions, most meetings, visits the most booths, does the most on social media, and the leaderboard has already begun. So you can see who is in the running to get that $1,000. It's 3 prizes, $1,000, $500, and $200. I can't win it, so I want one of you to win it. So that's about it from me. Just please remember, you log out of this workshop, go back into Pathable, go back into the agenda, and get right back into our next workshop. We've got 2 more happening today with Agilify and Scott Madden. And thank you all so much again. And if you need any help, we have our customer service desk in our expo hall, and you can always send a message to me the same way I said to go to Chewy and to Phil. I will be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see all of your faces in a couple of minutes in our next workshop. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.